Because tonight, we're going somewhere quiet. Too quiet. Where the air is thick with candle smoke, rot, and prayer. Where the people who kept medieval life running, the ones history forgets, worked in silence, in darkness, and in smells that never washed away. These were not knights, not poets, not saints. They were the ones who cleaned up after all of them. And if you think your job is bad, wait until you meet the men who shoveled human waste by torchlight, the women who handled the dead, and the lucky. Ones who stitched up wounds that no prayer could heal. This is the real story of work in the Middle Ages, not the gilded halls, but the gutters beneath them, where labor was penance and cleanliness was a rumor. 2-1. The gong farmer, keeper of the filth each night, long after curfew bells had silenced the streets, a few lonely figures crept through medieval cities, carrying nothing but shovels, buckets, and courage. They were called house gong farmers. Gong, being the polite word for what you'd find in the bottom of a latrine. Their job was simple: remove human waste from the deep pits beneath public toilets before it overflowed into the streets. But there was a problem. These cesspits were often 10, sometimes 20 feet deep, carved from earth, brick, or stone, filled over decades with the waste of entire neighborhoods. When the pit was full, the gong farmer climbed down with a rope, a candle, and a bucket. He shoveled until dawn. The air was so toxic that some died before reaching the bottom. If the candle went out, he followed soon after. And yet, they were paid surprisingly well. Because no one else would do it. They earned more in a week than a mason made in a month. But they couldn't live inside city walls. Their homes were built beyond the gates, next to tanneries, plague pits, and silence. Every sunrise, they emerged reeking of ammonia and death, but alive, which was considered success. You could always tell a gong farmer by his hands, permanently stained no matter how much he washed. But he was needed, because if he stopped, the entire city would drown in itself. 2. The leech collector. Blood for hire, further north in the swamps of England. Another kind of worker waded waist deep into cold, black water. They were the leech collectors. Doctors, or what passed for doctors, used leeches to balance the 4 humors. If you had a fever, you were blood. If you were tired, you were blood. If you were dead, they probably tried bleeding you anyway, but leeches weren't easy to find. So poor women, often widows or the elderly, walked into the marshes barefoot. The leeches clung to their legs, drinking until they swelled. Then, one by one, they were peeled off and dropped into jars. Each jar sold for pennies. Each wound risked infection. A single cut could fester, and a single fester could end a life. And yet, they returned every morning, whispering prayers against gangrene and drowning, because the physicians in London demanded their harvest. By the end of the 1600s, entire ponds were emptied of leeches. The trade was gone. But the scars on those women, small round bites that never quite healed, remained as proof that medicine, like everything else, was built on someone's suffering. 2-3. The tanner, master of the stench. There was a saying, "You smell a tanner before you see him." So tanners made leather for armor, books, belts, boots, gloves. Without them, civilization had no skin. But tanning was a process of death. First, you soaked animal hides in urine, then in a mixture of dog, dung, and lime, and finally, you scraped the rotting flesh off by hand. Every hide stank of decay. Every breath was a gamble. The stench clung to their bodies for life. No one married a tanner unless they had to. They were forbidden from living near churches or markets, not for sin, but smell. And yet, the leather they made was holy to everyone else. A knight's gloves, a monk's book, a noble's boots. All crafted by men no one dared to touch. Their hands were calloused, their lungs burned, and their skin cracked with sores. But they kept working, because the world demanded their filth to stay clean. 4. The plague burier, last friend of the dead. When plague arrived, all other jobs vanished. There was only one left burial. Those plague buriers were men hired to collect the dead and deliver them to mass graves outside the walls. They worked at night, when the air was safer. They dragged carts through narrow alleys, ringing bells, calling softly, "Bring out your dead." Most didn't last a week. Some drank themselves into numbness. Others stuffed herbs into their mouths to mask the smell. But they were needed, because no priest would risk the graveyards anymore. They became ghosts before they died. Children threw stones at them. Priests refused them sacraments. But every sunrise, they returned to work, still alive, until they weren't. When the plague ended, they were banned from the city. No one wanted the touch of men who had handled so much death. And so they wandered, unburied in memory, the only living people history forgot to bless. 5. The executioner. Law's necessary sin. Every city had one. Every city pretended it didn't. The executioner was both feared and required. He enforced justice through blood. He hanged, he beheaded, he burned. But he was also the town's unspoken doctor. He set broken bones, treated wounds, and brewed medicines, because no one else was willing to handle human flesh. He lived at the edge of town, beside the gallows. Children were forbidden to speak to his children. But if you needed a cure, a secret surgery, or a cheap amputation, you went to him at night. His tools were spotless. His clothes were not. After each execution, he washed the blade, whispered a prayer, and went home to eat. The city went on, pretending its justice was clean. He knew better. By dawn, the workers of filth, blood, and sin disappeared again, back to their corners of the world. The knights rode out, the priests preached, the merchants counted coins, and none of them ever wondered who made their clean lives possible. The gong farmer kept the streets from drowning. The tanner gave them leather to walk in. The leech collector gave them medicine. The executioner gave them law. Invisible hands holding civilization together, one bucket, one blade, one corpse at a time. And if you asked them why they kept working through rotten fear and exile, they would probably just shrug and say the only true medieval prayer. Because someone has to. Because someone has to. And that was enough. Enough to climb into another cesspit. Enough to wade through another swamp. Enough to walk into another room that smelled like dying. In a world where faith was currency and survival a miracle, work became worship. Every shovel of waste, every stitch in a corpse, every drop of sweat was a form of prayer. Not the kind sung in cathedrals, but whispered into the dark, where no one listened but God and the rats. These were the invisible believers. Their hymns were the scraping of metal, the splash of filth, the sigh of exhaustion, and though no church ever canonized them, they carried more souls to salvation than most saints. 2. 6. The gravedigger, keeper of the quiet earth. There was no job older or lonelier. When the bells tolled for death, the gravedigger went to work. Rain, snow, plague, it didn't matter. The dead kept coming. Most were parish servants, paid in beer, bread, and the occasional coin. They dug with wooden spades until the dirt turned black with moisture and memory. Some marked the graves with stones, some didn't bother. In pestilence years, names were a luxury. At night, they slept near the churchyard to guard against thieves and dogs, but also, maybe, because they didn't know how to leave the silence behind. They had seen too many faces. The infant, the soldier, the priest. Each one looked the same in the ground. If you spoke to one, he'd tell you that digging wasn't the hard part. It was the waiting. When the coffin was in, the dirt smoothed, the air heavy, and you realized you were the last person left who knew that name. That's what it meant to be a gravedigger, to hold memory for strangers, to be the final witness before forgetting. To Seven, the rat catcher, hero of the unseen war, every kingdom feared armies. But no army ever killed as many as the rats. The rat catcher was the closest thing the Middle Ages had to pest control. A man armed with a sack, a stick, and questionable ethics. He hunted the carriers of plague, filth, and famine. Some used dogs or ferrets, others poison. But most relied on bait, luck, and the strange respect rats seemed to have for their killers. The job was cursed and celebrated at once. When plague struck, rat catchers became saviors. When peace returned, they were banished for reminding people what they feared. They traveled between towns, sleeping where no one else dared, in stables, sewers, cemeteries. And they had a saying, if you see me, it's already too late. They wore amulets, garlic, and sometimes the bones of the rats they'd slain, as if to keep the balance between killer and victim. They joked that the plague didn't touch them because it had already claimed their smell. In truth, they just got lucky. Until they didn't. 8, the sin eater, devourer of souls, at the edge of Christian Europe, where theology blurred into folklore, a strange trade emerged. The sin eater. When someone died without confession, a loaf of bread was placed on the corpse's chest. The sin eater arrived, muttered a prayer, and ate it. The bread was said to absorb the dead's sins, every lie, every theft, every lust, and when the sin eater swallowed it, the soul was freed. It was an act of mercy and a curse. No priest would bury a sin eater. They were feared, shunned, half believed to be demons themselves. But for a few coins and a meal, they did what the church refused to do: forgive the unforgiven. Imagine living in a village that turned its back on you, yet still called for you when death came near. Imagine knowing your only company would be the dead, and that their peace depended on your hunger. There are no records of the last sin eater. Just a few mentions, a few old gravestones with no names. Perhaps the final one died alone, full of sins that weren't his, but heavy enough to keep the world turning a little longer. 9. The resurrectionist, merchant of the D. In the 1700s, science began to demand what religion had always forbidden: bodies. And so a new profession was born. The resurrectionist, or grave robber. They worked at night with shovels in silence. One dug. One watched. One listened for dogs. They sold the corpses to medical schools, to anatomists, to doctors learning the secrets of flesh. It wasn't seen as murder, just recycling. But to the families of the dead, it was desecration. So the resurrectionists worked fast. They broke no coffins. That was too loud. Instead, they cut a hole at the head, looped a rope under the shoulders, and pulled. The dirt made no sound. The body rose like it had changed its mind. Some became rich. Most ended up buried in the same ground they once disturbed. And when the church finally allowed legal dissections, the resurrectionists vanished overnight, proving that even crime can be made holy if the right man writes the law. 10. The candle maker. Light in the darkness. Every monastery needed candles. Every home, every prayer, every night. But the wax of the poor was not the bee's gift. It was tallow, melted animal fat. Tallow candles smoked, stank, and spoiled easily. Makers spent their days over boiling vats, breathing fumes that burned eyes and lungs, their clothes slick with grease. Yet they were the keepers of light. Without them, no sermon, no feast, no letter could continue past dusk. Their fingers were covered in wax burns, their skin yellowed from smoke, and still they worked, because to make light in a dark world was worth the suffering. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the wind still, you could hear them humming hymns while dipping wicks, as if to remind the darkness that it hadn't won yet. By the time the church bells rang for dawn, these people, the diggers, the eaters, the catchers, the burners, had already saved civilization again, without a word, without thanks, without even knowing they had done it. History remembers the kings who gave orders, but not the hands that obeyed them. And yet it was those hands, blistered, blackened, trembling, that kept the Middle Ages from collapsing entirely. They lived in the shadows, and the world mistook their silence for shame. But maybe it wasn't shame. Maybe it was peace. The quiet wisdom of those who understood that every clean street, every shining sword, every holy book was built on someone else's dirt. Because someone had to. Because someone had to. And that single sentence, quiet, resigned, ordinary, became the backbone of civilization. It was the breath behind every task no one else wanted to touch. It was whispered by the hands that carried the weight of the world while others slept. The knights, the kings, the bishops. They were remembered, but history never once looked back at the people who held the lanterns while power looked away. So let's look back. Fufan Fiai Xer 11, the dung gatherer, the fuel of the poor. Before there was coal, there was dung. Before there was firewood, there were fields stripped clean of waste. The dung gatherers, mostly children, widows, and the crippled, walked from dawn to dusk through villages, stables, and roadsides, scraping horse manure into woven baskets. It wasn't madness. It was survival. Dung was fuel. Dung was fertilizer. Dung was profit. The poorest sold it to blacksmiths or farmers, a penny a load. Some dried it into bricks and burned it in their hearths. The smoke was thick and bitter, but it kept frost from settling in their bones. Sometimes, on windy days, they'd follow nobles' carriages, waiting for a horse to relieve itself like beggars chasing coins. And when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of their trade back into their faces, they laughed. Because to them, that smell meant warmth. There are no saints of dung, but if there were, their hylos would smell like life itself. T2 Fakafai 312, the tooth drawer. The dentist of pain. Medicine in the Middle Ages was equal parts prayer and guesswork, and dentistry was closer to warfare. There's tooth drawers. Travelling healers who carried iron pliers, hammers, and thread, set up shop in market squares. A crowd gathered. A chair, a prayer, a coin. No anesthetic, no sterilization. Just a promise, gas, it will be quick. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. When the tooth wouldn't move, they heated the pliers. When the patient screamed, the crowd cheered. Pain was entertainment. Suffering was proof of healing. The best tooth drawers weren't the strongest, but the showiest. They knew how to distract the crowd, to make agony look like mercy, and when they left town, they took the screams with them, like traveling ghosts collecting echoes. 13. The Night Squire. Obedience in armor. Every tale of chivalry forgets the boy behind the knight. The Squire polished the armor, sharpened the blade, and woke before dawn to hold a mirror for a man who believed himself holy. He was servant, student, shield, and sacrifice all in one. He followed his master into battle and prayed he'd be remembered as more than a shadow. If the night fell, the squire's duty was to protect the body, even if it meant dying beside it. And if the night lived, the squire was forgotten. The songs never mention the hands that laced the armor, the hands that wiped the blood. They only mention the sword that killed. To 5 Persiri 14, the bell ringer, the voice of the dead and the living, high above the town, in wooden towers that swayed like ships, the bell ringers lived between earth and heaven. Their job was to speak in sound, to mark the hour, the wedding, the fire, the death. Every clang was an announcement. Someone was born. Someone was gone. Someone sinned. Someone prayed. The bells were heavy, the ropes rough. Each pull could tear skin or break ribs. Lightning struck towers often. Many ringers died mid-peal. When plague hit, the bells never stopped. The sound became constant, a heartbeat for a dying city. And when silence finally returned, the survivors said it felt wrong, like the world had stopped breathing. The bell ringer was never seen, but everyone heard him, the anonymous voice of time itself. T 15, the wet nurse, the borrowed mother. In noble houses, children were rarely nursed by their mothers. They were fed by strangers. Women paid to give milk. Their own infants left hungry somewhere else. These wet nurses were praised and pitied at once. They gave life that wasn't theirs to keep. They were forbidden to grow attached. But how could they not? Each baby's cry became a wound that healed too slowly. When the noble child was weaned, the wet nurse was dismissed, told she'd served God and family well. Her own baby, if still alive, often didn't recognize her anymore. No one wrote songs for the women who gave milk to empires. But without them, no dynasty would have survived long enough to build its own myth. TV 16. The miller, the dust of greed. Flour was life, and the miller controlled it. Every grain that passed through his hands became profit. Every loaf in the village owed him a debt. He worked near water. The endless creak of the wheel became his lullaby. But the dust that filled the air blackened his lungs, and the noise drove many half mad. The people hated him. The church accused him of theft. Yet when the mill stopped, they starved. Medieval law forbade touching the millstones without blessing them first. Some swore they turned by themselves at night. Others said the devil sat atop them, grinding bones instead of wheat. Maybe that's why millers always looked haunted. They'd seen what happens when hunger meets faith. 2. And so, through mud and ash and devotion, these people, the gatherers, the ringers, the nurses, the millers, held the edges of their world together. No one painted them. No one carved their faces into stone. But they were there, standing in the corners of history's light, keeping the candles lit, while the rest of humanity looked away. The Middle Ages were not made by kings or crusades. They were made by labor, by the hands that carried, cleaned, dug, and endured. And if you ever walk through an old European town and you smell something faintly sweet, like dust, leather, or rot, remember this: you're not smelling the past. You're smelling the people who built it. Because even centuries later, their scent lingers. In the mortar between old bricks, in the cracks of cathedral floors, polished by kneeling, in the faint musk that clings to parchment and prayer books. A ghost made of labor. The world calls it history, but history was just their sweat dried and forgotten. 2p fine fees are 17. The fuller, the walker of cloth. When wool came from the sheep, it wasn't ready to wear. It stank of lanolin and dirt, and had to be cleaned, thickened, and softened. The job fell to the fullers, also called walkers, because they walked on wool for hours, beating it with their feet. But not just water filled their vats. The secret ingredient was urine, collected from taverns, poured into troughs, warmed by the sun. So fullers worked in steaming pits of human waste, stomping, pressing, kneading. Each step soaked through their skin, their lungs filled with fumes. When they finished, the wool was white again, pure, soft, holy. The irony was not lost on anyone. They called it the cleansing. And yet no job made a man filthier. When a fuller walked through town, the smell preceded him like a curse. But so did his work. Every priest's robe, every noble cloak, every flag and every war. Purity made by filth, the Middle Ages in one profession. Tufan Fazier, 18. The barber, surgeon, between hair and death. He was not a doctor, not really. He was the man with steady hands and a sharp blade. The barber, surgeon cut hair, shaved beards, drew blood, set bones, pulled teeth, and sometimes, if God looked away, amputated limbs. His pole outside the shop showed red and white stripes, red for blood, white for bandages. It still does. Inside, the smell of iron and soap mixed in the air. Customers came for a trim and left with fewer body parts. He studied nothing but practice. Each wound taught him something. Each death reminded him of the limits of his trade. Sometimes he stitched soldiers in the morning and styled a lord's beard that evening. Life and death shared a chair. And when the church said only men of faith could perform surgery, the barber, surgeons nodded politely and kept their razors sharp. They were the proof that knowledge didn't need permission, just courage and a clean cloth. Tu Fanfafis, 19. The lime burner, maker of stone and smoker. Thea's lime burner lived outside the city, in hills where nothing green survived. He fed stone to fire until it turned to powder. The flames burned day and night, white and furious, leaving him covered in dust that never washed away. Lime made plaster, mortar, and the walls that built the world. But breathe it too long, and your lungs turn to ash. He worked with a scarf around his face, his eyes red from smoke, his hands cracked and ghostly. Travelers said you could always tell a lime burner's path by the whitened earth. A trail of death that built cathedrals. When he died, they buried him far from town. The soil refused him, as if it knew he'd spent a lifetime breaking stone to dust. Tu Fine Fee, I Sex 20. The night watch. Ice of the sleeping. Every city slept under their call. The Sez watchmen walked the narrow lanes with torches, their boots echoing through the dark. 10 o'clock and all's well, they cried. They lied, of course. Behind every shuttered window, something stirred, rats, thieves, hunger, fever. But their voice made people believe the night was safe. They carried halberds, keys, and fear. They caught drunks, lovers, and ghosts alike. Most couldn't read. Many couldn't fight. But they knew every creak of every street. They were the city's heartbeat. Slow, steady, tired. Sometimes, when dawn came, they'd find one of their own frozen on the steps, still gripping the torch that had long since burned out. The others would whisper a prayer, then take his place. Because someone had to. Falafir Sers 21. The alewife, mistress of the cup. Before beer was brewed by monks, it was made by women. The alewivers kept the village alive. They brewed in kitchens, in tubs, with herbs and bread yeast. Selling pence to farmers and travelers alike, some added hallucinogenic flowers to make the drink holy. Others added anything cheap to make it last longer. The line between medicine and poison was a thin one. Their alehouses were loud, smoky, full of laughter and sin. The church called them immoral, but the towns called them necessary. When witch hunts began, the alewives were among the first accused. Their brewing sticks mistaken for broomsticks, their cats for familiars, their knowledge of herbs for sorcery. But long before the word witch, they were simply women who made life bearable. Without them, the Middle Ages would have died of thirst. 2 Fanfafirigisir 22. The Scribner, prisoner of Inky. Every word that survived the Dark Ages did so through their hands. The Scribners, monks bent over desks in candlelight, copied scripture, law, and stories line by line. They wrote until their backs broke, until their fingertips turned black from ink, until wax dripped on their hands and hardened like armor. Each letter was a prayer, each word a seed of eternity. They worked in silence, forbidden to speak, their only company the scratching of quills and the slow ticking of hours marked by bells. Sometimes, one would add a note in the margin, "My hand is tired. I am cold. I hate this work." But they never stopped, because to stop was to let the world go dark again. The Scribners saved civilization, one cramped sentence at a time. The deeper you go into medieval labor, the clearer it becomes. Civilization didn't rest on crowns or swords. It rested on sweat, on the quiet rhythm of hands repeating the same motion for years, for lifetimes, for generations. When we look back, we see castles, but the people who built them never looked up. Their eyes were always on the stone, the wheel, the ground. They didn't think they were making history. They thought they were just getting by. And maybe that's why it lasted. Because the ones who never sought glory were the ones who held the world together, while everyone else was busy being remembered. Because the ones who never sought glory were the ones who held the world together while everyone else was busy being remembered. And when their names finally vanished, their work stayed behind, stitched into fabric, hammered into stone, scratched into parchment, baked into bread. You can still touch it. Every time your hand grazes the worn groove of a church pew or runs across the uneven wall of a medieval street, you are touching the fingerprints of the forgotten. They are everywhere. They always have been. Dritharithi, 23. The washerwoman. The endless river. If you followed the sound of water in any medieval town, you would find them. The washerwomen, kneeling by the riverbanks, elbows deep in icy water, beating cloth against stone. Their rhythm was the sound of exhaustion. Thump, splash, twist. All day, every day, they scrubbed the linen of nobles, priests, soldiers. Their own clothes came last, if they had any energy left. In winter, their hands cracked and bled. In summer, the water stank of soap and sewage. When plague came, they were blamed for spreading it. When plague left, they were forgotten again. But they carried more truth in their backs than the chronicles ever did. Because they knew what no historian would write, that cleanliness was never about purity. It was about fear. They washed because no one else would. They washed because filth was always patient, and because someone had to fight it. At night, when the moon touched the river, you could see steam rising, the ghosts of labor leaving the water. 24. The candle snuffer, the hand that ends the light. Inside every cathedral, after the prayers were done, after the saints were praised, and the choirs gone silent, one man remained. He walked the aisles with a long iron pole, snuffing each candle one by one. This candle snuffer was never named in records. He was the man who unmade light. He ended the day. Each hiss of smoke was a benediction in reverse, a small funeral for the flame. It was said that the air after he finished was sacred. because only in darkness could faith sleep. Some nights, when he finished his rounds, he would sit in the black silence of the church and whisper to himself, "I have done my part," and he had, because without darkness, light means nothing. 2 Funfifars 25, the cook, the alchemist of hunger. You think of feasts, of banquets, of roasted swans. But in truth, most cooks worked not in palaces, but in narrow kitchens where the air was thick with smoke and sweat. They boiled bones to feed soldiers. They stretched scraps into stew. They burned their arms, lost their hearing to the roar of open fires, and inhaled smoke until their lungs turned grey. They were chemists without knowing it, balancing salt, ash, and hope. In noble courts, cooks lived in fear. One wrong dish, one bad taste, and they could be whipped, exiled, or executed. Yet their hands shaped the flavor of history. Empires rose and fell on empty stomachs, and the cook made sure no one noticed. Some wrote secret recipes, not for survival, but for joy. Proof that even in a world of labor, someone still remembered how to create pleasure. Afan Kreinbaus 26. The glassblower. Breathing fire. He worked where air became danger. In a workshop so hot that sweat turned to steam before it hit the ground, the glassblower took molten sand and turned it into light. Bottles, windows, chalices, fragile miracles of breath. Every breath was a gamble. One too strong, and the glass collapsed. One too weak, and it hardened midair. The heat cracked his lips, the fumes poisoned his lungs. But when the glass cooled, it captured eternity. In cathedrals, people stared at the stained windows, seeing only saints and stories. The glassblower saw himself, his breath frozen into color, his life glowing from behind the light of heaven. He didn't pray anymore. He didn't need to. He'd already made something that lasted longer than faith. See. 27. The cooper, builder of barrels. Des Cooper was the quiet architect of trade. He made barrels for wine, for water, for salt, for grain. Everything that moved in the medieval world moved in wood. Each barrel had to be watertight without glue or nails. Just heat, pressure, and faith in the curve. He worked to the rhythm of the hammer, clack, clack, hiss. When a barrel sealed properly, it sang. A deep wooden hum, a sound that meant survival. Every tavern, every ship, every monastery cellar owed him a prayer, but no one prayed to coopers. They were just the ones who made sure the wine didn't spoil before the sermon began. 2 Fan 55 28. The miner. The blind kings below. Beneath the earth, men worked without sky or time. They dug for salt, silver, and coal. For other people's wealth, never their own. The air was poison, the tunnels narrow and silent. Candles flickered weakly, barely touching the dark. If a miner stopped humming, others knew he was dead. They said you could always tell a miner by his eyes. How they flinched at daylight, as if truth itself was too bright to bear. Some believed the earth was alive, and that each strike of the pickaxe was a wound she would one day return. Maybe she did. 2.5 Argos 29. The cooper's widow, keeper of nothing. When a craftsman died, his widow inherited his debts and his silence. She couldn't remarry without permission, couldn't own land, couldn't sell the tools he left behind. So she worked in secret, mending, patching, pretending she wasn't skilled. Women who knew trades were dangerous. They made the guilds nervous. At night, she would light one of his leftover candles and whisper the words he used to say, "Fit the curve, trust the grain." No one knew her name, but her barrels held through the winter. 2 Fanwa Fires 30. The Pilgrim Guide, walker of roads. Before maps, before travel books, there were guides. Men and women who led pilgrims to relics, shrines, and miracles. They knew the roads, the thieves, the wells that still had clean water. They carried walking sticks marked with hundreds of scratches. Each one a journey finished, a soul delivered. They told stories by campfire, half faith, half warning. Sometimes they got lost. Sometimes the pilgrims didn't make it, but they always kept walking. And when people asked why, they gave the same answer all medieval workers did, because someone has to. And maybe that was the truest prayer of all. Not the ones sung in Latin, not the ones written in gold leaf, but the quiet ones said through work, hands deep in mud, eyes half closed from smoke, lungs full of dust. Those were the voices that kept the Middle Ages breathing. Not the kings who ordered, but the ones who obeyed without question, not because they believed in glory, but because they believed in continuation. When you walk through an old town and see uneven cobblestones, that's them. When you hear bells ringing in the distance, that's them. When you hold something handmade and imperfect, still stubbornly alive after centuries, that's them. The world was built by people who had no time to imagine it would last, and maybe that's why it did. Because someone had to. And still, the echo of that prayer lingers. You can hear it in the scrape of a broom on a modern street, in the hum of an old janitor polishing marble floors that don't belong to him, in the sigh of a nurse at dawn, in the click of a keyboard when no one's watching. Different tools. Same faith. Same exhaustion. Same sentence. Because someone has to. The Middle Ages ended, but the work never did. Sex epilogue, the unwritten chronically, historians write of kings and wars, but the truth is quieter than parchment. It lives in the margins, in the smudge of a scribe's thumb, in a blackened nail mark on a cathedral stone, in the uneven rhythm of hand-cut wood. Every act of labor was a word in a book that no one read, but everyone lived inside. The washerwoman's rhythm, the cooper's hammer, the gong farmer's shovel. Together they formed the grammar of civilization, and for every saint recorded, 1,000 unknown hands kept faith alive by keeping everything else from collapsing. If you close your eyes and listen hard enough, you might still hear them. The hiss of candle wax, the splash of cloth, the drag of a cartwheel over cobbles. It's not nostalgia, it's proof. Proof that work, in all its grime and grief, was the truest form of prayer the human heart ever invented. Two fafaf laborers, the last laborers. Imagine the final day of a dying village. The church is cracked, the market empty, the wind hollow through the windows. No kings come, no priests. Only a few figures remain. A woman folding laundry that no one will wear. A man fixing a barrel for a tavern that's been dry for months. A bell ringer pulling a rope out of habit. They aren't working for hope. They're working for memory, because even when no one's left to notice, the hands still move. The pattern continues. The world breathes through them. It always did. Fee, the weight of continuity. To work without recognition is to carry a weight that no one sees, but everyone depends on. The gong farmer carried it in buckets, the washerwoman in her back, the scribe in his fingers, the miner in his lungs. And still, they went on, because if they stopped the illusion of order, the fragile scaffolding of civilization would crumble. They never asked for meaning. Meaning was for poets and priests. They asked only for a day without hunger, a night without cold, a morning where the tools hadn't rusted yet. But by some cruel grace, that was enough to create eternity. The Fangfiras, the holy of the ordinary, there is a holiness that hides in ordinary things. A broom leaning against a wall, a piece of bread cooling on a wooden table, a a shirt drying on a line. The medieval world was full of such altars, unblessed, unnoticed, but sacred all the same. Every worker was a priest of necessity, every task a ritual, every repetition a kind of prayer bead, and perhaps that's why their ghosts don't rest. Because no one ever thanked them, and because gratitude was never the point was the work, the doing, the endless, unrecorded continuation, the fun fee-fees idris, the dust that remains. If you sweep the floor of a medieval chapel today, you'll raise centuries of dust, each mote a tiny relic of someone's life. The skin of a tanner, the hair of a candle maker, the ash of a lime burner, the ink flakes of a scribe, the breath of a glassblower, all mixed into the air we breathe. We are inhaling their story. We are made of it. The present is just the past that hasn't finished exiling. Futu find ficus a quiet requiem. So tonight, if you light a candle, let it burn a little longer. Think of the man who made it, hands raw, eyes stinging from smoke, who never once imagined someone, hundreds of years later, would do the same thing in his honor. Think of the woman who washed another's clothes and whispered the same prayer you just did. Think of the nameless, the tired, the bent, not heroes, not martyrs, just the maintenance crew of history. And realize this, the Middle Ages didn't end. They just moved indoors. The world still runs on the backs of people who will never be remembered, but without whom memory itself couldn't exist. 2 fun fee-fi hours, coda, the one rule that lasted. The medieval world had thousands of rules. When to work, when to fast, what to eat, what to wear, who to love, who to fear. Most of them faded. Empires fell, kings rotted, faiths changed. But one rule endured. The simplest, harshest, and most human of them all: do what must be done. Because someone has to. And so we still do. Every generation, every dawn, every forgotten hour in which someone out there is sweeping, digging, typing, breathing, keeping the illusion of order alive. They may never know it, but they are the final link in a chain that stretches back to a gong farmer, a washerwoman, a scribe. They are the quiet ones, the true builders of every age. And when their time comes, and their names fade like candle smoke, the next will rise, light a new flame, and whisper that same old prayer to the sleeping world, because someone has to. Maybe, just maybe. That's the closest thing humanity has ever had to immortality. Not the kind carved in stone, or sung by choirs, or written in gold. But the quiet immortality of repetition. The cycle of hands passing purpose forward, from one weary body to the next. You can see it in every century. The same story, the same work, the same prayer with new tools. A mother sewing under lamplight. A janitor locking a door after midnight. A factory worker watching a machine hum like a distant god. They don't think of history, but history thinks of them. Because it always begins the same way, with someone tired, someone anonymous, someone who says, "I'll do it." The modern hairs of the medieval, the world pretends it's changed. It hasn't. We still live by medieval logic. Keep the lights on, keep the water flowing, keep the world pretending it's clean. The only difference now is the silence. Machines hum instead of hands, but the rhythm is the same. The medieval tanner breathes again in factory workers in Dhaka. The scribe in the coder's glowing screen. The leech collector in the nurse drawing blood. The gong farmer in the sanitation worker scrubbing the alley before dawn. The tools changed. The fear didn't, neither did the faith. And if one of them looked up, looked across centuries, they'd recognize us instantly. The clothes are different, the smell is not, the exhaustion is timeless. The The sound of civilization, every civilization has a sound. Ours hums in neon. Theirs hissed in tallow and breath. The Middle Ages sang in the rhythm of labor, hammers, bells, footsteps, wind in church towers, the sigh of effort between survival and surrender. We still make that song, only we call it productivity now. We pretend it's progress, but it's the same old melody, different instruments, same fatigue. And when the world finally grows quiet again, when the lights die and the engines still, someone will hear it. That faint, ghostly music of work, and mistake it for silence. The hidden saints, we give sainthood to martyrs, to miracles, to the glamorous kind of suffering. But the saints who kept the world alive were the ones who didn't die for their work. They just lived through it. The woman who washed, the man who dug, the child who carried water until his hands blistered. They made no sermons. They performed no wonders. Their holiness was endurance. And maybe that's the purest kind. Not fire from heaven, but the kind that keeps the bread from burning, the kind that keeps going even when faith is a luxury and exhaustion is free. The memory that breathes. We talk about history as if it's behind us, a long corridor with closed doors. But if you listen closely, you'll hear it breathing. Every breath of wind through an old window is a whisper from someone who once stood there, tired, barefoot, working. The medieval world isn't gone. It's just distributed in your hands, your lungs, your bones. Every habit, every ritual, every sigh is inherited. We are not descendants of kings. We are descendants of the ones who kept the fires lit when the kings slept. And they are still here, in the pulse of a streetlight, in the flicker of a computer fan, in the heartbeat between shifts. The final shift, someday, far ahead of us, the machines will fall silent. The cities will crumble. And the world will begin again. Someone like the gong farmer, the washerwoman, the miner, the nurse, will pick up a piece of rubble, dust it off, and start building again. Not for glory, not for history, but because the human heart only knows one true rule: keep going. And when the first stone of the new world is set, and the first fire rekindled, and the first weary soul wipes their hands on their clothes, they'll look up at the ruins of everything that came before and whisper the oldest sentence we ever made, because someone has to. Postscript. The candle still burns. History ends every night and begins every morning in the same small act. Someone lighting a candle. The wax changes, the flame doesn't. Maybe that's what all work is, a way of keeping the dark at arm's length, one flicker at a time. And if that's true, then every gong farmer, every scribe, every miner, every washerwoman was not just surviving. They were saving the world, one dirty, tired, nameless act at a time. So the next time the lights hum, or the pipes rattle, or the clock ticks past midnight and someone, somewhere, is still working, remember this: they are the last medievals, and through them the world still breathes. The sentence lingers, ancient, invisible, unending. It moves through centuries like a shadow that refuses to fade. It clings to every age, to every generation that convinces itself it has moved beyond the dirt, the sweat, the repetition. It whispers beneath the sound of progress, reminding us that all light, no matter how bright, still needs someone to tend the flame. We build new machines, new systems, new gods, but the rule remains the same for the world to move. Someone must pull the weight, and those who pull it never think of themselves as heroes. They never will. The eternal shift. At 3 a.m, somewhere far away, a cleaner pushes a mop across the marble floor of a building, that we'll never know her name. The floor gleams, and the world moves on, pretending she doesn't exist. A hospital nurse adjusts a blanket over a stranger's body, the heartbeat of the monitor blinking like a candle flame. A truck driver rolls through the night, carrying food for people he'll never meet. An old man in a factory wipes grease from a machine that hums like an iron prayer. These are not medieval scenes, and yet they are, because the nature of work hasn't changed. Only the costumes have. We no longer wear wool or carry torches, but we still kneel, we still lift, we still obey the rhythm of need. And in the end, that's what binds us more tightly to our ancestors than any bloodline ever could. 2. The inheritance of labor. We like to think of inheritance as wealth, but the truest inheritance is duty. Passed quietly from the dead to the living, from one tired pair of hands to the next. Every time someone starts a shift they didn't choose, they are answering a call older than language. The medieval farmer heard it in the soil. The blacksmith heard it in the ringing of his hammer. The scribe heard it in the scratching of his quill. The nurse hears it in the heartbeat. The janitor in the hum of fluorescent lights. The coder in the endless blinking cursor. All of them following the same command, spoken by no one, obeyed by everyone: keep the world running. No history book records this inheritance, but it moves through our bones like instinct. It's the gravity of civilization. Invisible, relentless, necessary. To fanflancher the machinery of forgetting, modern life is one great miracle: it hides the hands. The farmer is gone, but the bread arrives. The sewer worker is unseen, but the water runs clear. The delivery driver vanishes into traffic, but the package is on your doorstep by morning. We built systems not to honor labor, but to disguise it. We call it efficiency, but it's really erasure. A new kind of invisibility, polished and packaged, like medieval grime wrapped in glass. But the truth remains the same. If every hidden hand stopped moving, the illusion would collapse within a day. The lights would die, the streets would flood, the shelves would empty, and we'd finally see how much of our world was held together by ghosts in uniforms. The medievals are gone, but their rhythm never stopped. It just changed its name. The Quiet Revolution. There's a strange irony to this age. The quieter a job, the more vital it is. You don't notice the janitor until the floor is dirty. You don't notice the cook until you're hungry. You don't notice the nurse until you bleed. And yet these are the ones who keep the fragile order upright. They are the quiet revolution that never ends. The army without banners, without pay, without rest, fighting entropy one shift at a time. Somewhere, a teacher grades papers long after everyone has gone home. Somewhere, a caretaker waters plants in a hospital lobby. Somewhere, a mother folds clothes by the light of a phone screen. These small, thankless gestures are not meaningless. They are the machinery of continuity. The same force that built medieval cathedrals now builds data centers. The same instinct that cleaned plague streets now wipes glass tables in cafes. The same devotion that copied holy texts now types in voices and emails. Different tools, same heart. 2. Funfi Bisley, the myth of progress. We imagine progress as escape, as if we've climbed out of the mud, but progress is just better plumbing for the same river. The filth is still there, we've just buried it deeper. For every gleaming tower, someone still scrubs its bathrooms. For every plane that takes off, someone still loads its cargo in the cold. For every algorithm that changes the world, someone still cleans the keyboard it runs on. We live in castles again. Only this time, they're made of glass and code. and the peasants still keep them shining. No torchlight. Just LEDs, no carts of dung. Just trash bins rolled through linoleum corridors. But the rhythm is identical. The endless hum of invisible hands, keeping the illusion upright. Fon Faitrus, the faith of maintenance. Every civilization worships something. Theirs was God. Ours is convenience. And in both religions, there are priests who keep the rituals alive. They clean, repair, deliver, restock, reboot. They make the miracles of modern life repeatable. A single moment of silence from them, and the temple of technology would collapse. They don't wear robes. They wear uniforms, name tags, gloves, but their prayers sound the same. Please let it hold. Please let it work. Please let me get through the night. They aren't asking heaven for help. They're asking the machine. But the sentiment hasn't changed in 1,000 years. The medievals prayed to saints. We pray to systems. And both require the same thing to keep believing. Someone willing to maintain them. The new scribes. There are still scribes. They just write in pixels now. They fill spreadsheets, databases, message logs. Not for beauty, but for function. They don't illuminate manuscripts with gold leaf, but they illuminate screens with the same devotion. And like their ancestors, they leave tiny notes in the margins, comments, jokes, initials, hidden test messages that whisper, "I was here." Those invisible traces are our new manuscripts, a digital parchment that will one day be as ancient and indecipherable as Latin is to us. We'll call them archives. But they'll be the same thing. They've always been evidence of someone working. So the rest could forget how. Tout fin toujours, the return of the candle. Every age thinks it has killed the candle. Every age ends up lighting it again. Power fails. The lights flicker. And suddenly, someone reaches for fire. Because deep down, we know that the oldest technologies never really die. They wait. They wait for the moment when the new world collapses under its own arrogance, and someone quiet, someone practical, picks up the old tools again. That moment will come. It always does. And when it does, someone will hold that flame steady, just long enough for another civilization to rebuild around it. And once again, they'll whisper the same prayer the medievals did, because someone has to. Ooh, and that's the story of work. Not as history writes it, but as it lives. A story without heroes, without villains, without endings. Just hands, and time, and the eternal, unseen devotion of people who keep the world from falling apart. They are the last medievals. And the first of whatever comes next. They are the last medievals. And the first of whatever comes next. Standing on the edge of centuries, one hand buried in the dust of the past, the other reaching toward a future that will forget them just the same. Every age needs them. The ones who keep the gears moving when the rest of us stop to admire how well the gears are turning. They don't write history, they repeat it, quietly, tirelessly, endlessly. Enfanfafiers, the continuum of hand-see. Imagine a single motion, a hand passing an object to another hand, a bucket, a quill, a wrench, a keyboard. Now stretch that motion across 1,000 years. That is civilization. From the gong farmer's shovel to the nurse's syringe. From the scribe's feather to the programmer's cursor, the motion hasn't changed. Only the weight has. The world is built on these quiet transfers of labor, of skill, of exhaustion. A chain of invisible apprentices, teaching the same lesson over and over. You don't have to understand the purpose to serve it. You just have to keep going, and so they do. They always do. Fafine Frantras, the ghost in the circuit. If you listen to the hum of a server room at night, it almost sounds like breath, the same steady rhythm monks once made while copying scripture in candlelight. Every blinking light is a heartbeat. Every file, a prayer for permanence. The medieval scribe wrote so the word of God would not die. The modern scribe types so that data won't. Both are acts of faith, one in heaven, the other in hard drives, and yet both fade. Ink turns to dust, data corrupts. But while they last, each believes they are preserving eternity. That belief, not the technology, is what binds them together. Because without the illusion of permanence, why work at all? To 21055 the architects of silence, every structure that survives time, a church, a bridge, a tower, owes its life to people whose names were never carved on its walls. The masons who carved each stone by hand, the woodcutters who shaped the beams, the mortar mixers, the rope pullers, the ones who fetched water from miles away. They were not builders in the romantic sense. They were the labor beneath the labor. They worked to the sound of bells and birds, and when they were done, they left no signatures, only strength. Modern skyscrapers rise in the same silence. Steel instead of stone, cranes instead of ropes, but the rhythm is the same, the measured heartbeat of creation through repetition. We call it progress. They would have called it survival. Tufai, us the weight of tomorrow. The hardest part of labor isn't the doing. It's the knowing that what you do will vanish. The medieval builder watched the cathedral rise, knowing he'd die before the spire was complete. The modern scientist launches satellites that will outlive him, but forget his name. It's the same humility to create for a world that won't remember. And maybe that's the secret all workers share. An understanding that glory is a distraction and permanence a myth. All that matters is the motion, the doing, the carrying forward. To Fonfi eyes, the library of dust. Walk into an old library and breathe deeply. The air smells faintly of paper, mold, and ink. But if you've ever been in a medieval workshop, it smells the same. Because what you're inhaling isn't age. It's the ghosts of labor. The sweat of the parchment maker, who scraped animal skin for days until it thinned to silk. The oil of the binder's fingers pressed into leather. The soot of the candle smoke that stained the edges of each page. Every book is a reliquary of human touch. And so is every screen. The fingerprints might wipe away, but the act remains. It's all just work. Stacked, layered, rewritten, until it starts to resemble knowledge.
Obvious.
The circle of forgotten Namus. Somewhere in a small church in England, there's a plaque listing all the workers who rebuilt the roof after a fire in 1423. Every name is half, erased by centuries of rain. Thomas, Elias, N. John the Younger. Nothing else. No birth, no death, no legacy, but their work. The roof still stands. You can stand beneath it now and hear the echo of their hammers in the wooden beams. That's all they wanted. Not memory. Continuity. We build monuments for kings, but the world is held up by people like that. People whose only monument is the thing they built. Tifan Fevars, the whisper of machinists. When machines replaced hands, we thought the world had moved on from toil, but machines don't work alone. They need feeding, guiding, fixing. They need caretakers. Modern tanners, fullers, scribes. The more complex the machine, the more invisible its keepers. Every time your screen lights up, somewhere, someone made sure it could. A technician in a cold room. A miner digging cobalt from a pit. A cleaner wiping dust from the lens. They don't see each other, but they share the same prayer, let it work. Let it last. Let it not break today. The machines hum, and the world pretends it's effortless. But that hum is still human breath disguised as progress. The kingdom of the ordinary. The future won't be ruled by kings. It never was. It will be ruled, as it always has been, by the ordinary, the invisible multitude that never stopped working. They don't write manifestos or wage wars. They just show up. That's their revolution consistency. Every civilization collapses when its ordinary people stop showing up. Rome fell not because the gods were angry, but because the workers stopped believing the effort was worth it. So did every empire since. The real apocalypse is not fire, it's fatigue. And the only thing that saves us from it is someone, anyone, who still believes in the value of doing what must be done. Fears the secret covenant between all laborers, past, present, future. There's a pact, unspoken, unwritten, unbreakable. It says, I will carry the weight today so that you may carry it tomorrow. You will never meet me. You will never thank me, but I trust you will keep going. It is the purest act of faith humanity has ever made, not in gods or kings or progress, but in each other. It is the same pact the medievals made when they laid the first stones of the cathedrals, when they dug graves, when they lit candles, when they cleaned cesspits. It's the same one the last medievals make now, sweeping a factory floor at dawn or closing a register long after midnight. This is what connects us, the long, silent lineage of caretakers. We are their children and their replacements. And one day, we'll hand the weight to someone else. They won't know our names either. They won't need to, because someone has to. And maybe that's the point. To be forgotten is the final mercy of labor. To work so completely that when you are gone, the world continues without you. To leave no monument but function. To vanish into usefulness. That's how the medievals lived. And that's how we live still, whether we admit it or not. Every time you turn on a light, drink water, or open a door that someone else oiled long before you arrived, you are touching their ghosts. Not haunting, but continuity. Because the truest immortality doesn't live in memory. It lives in maintenance. 2. Fanfrivus, the immortality of function. There's a strange grace in the things that never stop working, a hinge that still swings after centuries, a well that still gives water, a song still sung. Someone built those things. Someone adjusted, tightened, rewove, repaired, so that one day you could use them without knowing why they lasted. And that's what every worker secretly hopes for. Not fame, not reward, but the small miracle of something holding together long after their hands have gone cold. The medievals prayed for heaven, but maybe they built it here, in every object that endured their touch. A door that opens smoothly. A page that turns without tearing. A world that still functions. 2 errors. The forgotten language. Labor speaks a language older than words. It's the dialect of gesture, a nod between masons, a glance between midwives, a rhythm between sailors pulling ropes in unison. Every age learns its grammar anew. Our version is the tapping of keys, the hiss of espresso machines, the murmur of headsets in offices. We think it's modern. It's not. It's the same chorus, the low hum of continuity. The melody that has accompanied humanity since the first hand-carved stone from mountain. We live inside a cathedral of labor, invisible, enormous, and eternal. Each person adds one brick, one word, one motion, then disappears into the echo. To Yippers, the builders of air. Some work leaves no trace. The storyteller, the teacher, the caretaker, the lover. Their labor vanishes the moment it's done, but its absence would collapse everything. The medieval storyteller who recited in a tavern is gone. So is the monk who comforted the dying, and the mother who sang through famine. But their echoes remain in us, in our patience, our humor, our quiet ways of helping each other survive. Their work wasn't preserved in stone. It was preserved in behavior, in the soft, spoken continuity of kindness. We don't call that work, but maybe it's the oldest kind of all. Tu fan figris, the weight of kinness, the labor is heavy. Kindness is heavier. Both demand the same sacrifice time. Both go unrewarded, unseen, unremembered. Both keep the world intact. Somewhere, a nurse stays an extra hour. Somewhere, a driver lets someone merge. Somewhere, a stranger picks up a fallen bag. Small things. Meaningless things. But every medieval cathedral was built from stones this small. The trick was believing they mattered. And they did. They still do. Civilization isn't a structure. It's a series of gestures repeated for so long they start to feel eternal. Tu fan years, the invention of tomorrow, the work, at its core, is the belief in a future you may never see. Every harvest, every bridge, every lullaby is a wager against entropy. The medieval builder believed that tomorrow deserved beauty, even if he wouldn't live to see it. So he carved angels into rafters that only birds would ever notice. The modern worker believes that tomorrow deserves stability, so they tighten bolts, file reports, clean streets, not because it changes the world, but because it keeps the world from collapsing. We don't build eternity with ambition. We build it with maintenance. Every act of care is defiance against decay. Every ordinary job is rebellion against the void. And maybe that's all humanity ever was. An organized resistance to forgetting. Fantrafafars, the unseen marche. Imagine the timeline of the world as a road paved by hands. The march never stops. Children grow into workers, workers into ghosts, ghosts into stories, stories into silence. And in that silence, new footsteps begin. The procession continues, past the ruins, past the towers, past every idea of progress or salvation. The only constant is the sound of effort. Not music, not speech, just the sound of existence being sustained. The same sound that filled the medieval streets at dawn. The same sound that fills ours now, that rhythm, the pulse of labor, is the only true anthem the human race ever wrote. A fanfare. The candle's shadow. For every flame that burns, there's a shadow behind it. The light gets the glory, the shadow does the work. The candle maker knew this. The miner knew it. The washerwoman, the screbner, the nurse, all knew they were shadows in someone else's light. And yet they stayed, because the shadow is not lesser than the flame. It defines it. Without them, there is no contrast, no beauty, no balance. They made the world visible by living in its dimmest corners. And that is perhaps the highest form of art. To labor in darkness so others may see clearly. To philos, the last reflection. If there's a heaven for the forgotten, it probably looks like a workshop. Not clouds and trumpets, but tables covered in tools. Ink stains, sawdust, steam. A place where everyone is busy and no one is alone. The gong farmer laughs with the miner. The scribe shows the coder how to steady his hand. The washerwoman teaches the nurse how to breathe through exhaustion. The tanner shakes his head at the man who invented plastic. It's not peace, it's purpose. And that, in the end, is what they always wanted. Not rest, but reason. Because even in eternity, someone will need to keep the light burning. And one of them will smile, pick up the tools, and say, because someone has to. And the words echo, not upward toward heaven, but outward through the centuries, across stone, across steel, across screens. They travel through the air like a rumor that refuses to die, a confession whispered by every generation to the next. The medievals said it at dawn, pulling carts through mud. The sailors said it under the stars, tightening ropes with bleeding hands. The machinists said it in the roar of engines, and the nurses said it through their masks. Whispering to patients who couldn't hear them, we still say it. Maybe not out loud, but every time we sigh and stand again, every time we clean, repair, or endure, the same prayer leaves our lungs. Not a plea, not a lament, just a statement of fact, because someone has to. The persistence of the ordinary civilization isn't built by heroes. Heroes appear when the world is already on fire. The ones who keep the flame alive before that happens. They're the real architects of continuity. They never stand in the spotlight. They crouch in the dim glow behind it, fixing the ropes, sweeping the stage, making sure the story can continue. We call them workers, servants, laborers. They call themselves tired, but the truth is, they are what hold the world in place. Every roof that doesn't fall, every bridge that doesn't collapse, every city that wakes up to running water. That's their miracle. Their quiet, repeated, invisible miracle. And if you listen closely, you can hear the rhythm of their prayer beneath the hum of modern life. It's the same rhythm that echoed through medieval streets. Shovel, broom, bell, breath. A music no one writes down, but everyone knows by heart. The custodians of collapse, and every empire begins with a worker laying the first stone, and ends with another sweeping dust from the ruins. Between them stretches 1,000 years of maintenance. Not glory, maintenance. When things fall apart, it isn't because the kings failed. It's because the workers stopped believing in the act of holding everything together. They stopped sweeping, stopped shoveling, stopped tending the small fires. Civilization, it turns out, doesn't end in fire or war. It ends in neglect. The medievals knew that instinctively. That's why they kept their routines through famine, through plague, through endless sermons about sin. They didn't need faith in salvation. They had faith in work. To them, the act of labor was the act of living. If your hands were still moving, the world was still turning, and maybe that's still true. The invisible calendar. Every era believes itself to be modern. Every worker believes they are living in the last age that will ever require toil. But there is no final age, only new tools. A blacksmith becomes an engineer. A monk becomes a data entry clerk. A tanner becomes a chemist. A gong farmer becomes a sanitation technician. Different words, same story. The Middle Ages didn't vanish. They adapted. They simply traded mud for metal and plague for deadlines. And when the last server crashes and the last city flickers into darkness, someone will still step forward with a candle and whisper into the silence, because someone has to. The fragility of order. There's a comfort in believing the world runs itself. That lights turn on by magic. That food appears because of systems, that the streets clean themselves while we sleep. But order is an illusion balanced on exhaustion. A miracle powered by the invisible. Every pipe, every wire, every file is a string pulled taut by someone you'll never meet. And if they let go, just once, everything unravels. The medievals had no illusion of stability. They lived in a world that reminded them, every day, how quickly things fall apart. That's why they worked. That's why they prayed. Not out of faith in eternity, but fear of collapse. We have the same fear. We just renamed it stress. The new cathedrals, our cathedrals aren't made of stone anymore. They hum with electricity. They blink, they scroll, they update. But behind their glass walls, the same devotion still burns. Coders writing lines of logic like monks copying verses. Technicians crawling through vents like masons through tunnels. Cleaners walking silent aisles, their reflections gliding across screens like ghosts of candlelight. They may not call it worship, but it is. Every repetition, every maintenance check is a ritual of preservation. And like the cathedrals before them, these temples of code and wire will one day fall into ruin. And someone else will dig through the rubble, find the traces of their work, and whisper, "They must have loved this place." The poetry of repetition work is often described as meaningless because it repeats. But maybe that's the point. The repetition is the meaning. The rhythm itself is what keeps despair away. Scrub, sweep, hammer, breathe. Every motion says, "I exist." Every repetition says, "I continue." The medievals repeated prayers for the same reason we repeat passwords. To keep something alive that would otherwise vanish overnight. And though our machines have multiplied the motion, they've never replaced it. Because in the end, the motion isn't about efficiency, it's about endurance. And endurance, not brilliance, is what built the world, the symmetry of effort. There's a strange beauty in how history loops back on itself. 1,000 years ago, someone bent over a table, carving wood into a tool. Today, someone else bends over a desk, carving time into wages. The tools changed. The posture didn't. The ache in the spine is identical. The silence afterward feels the same. And both will die thinking their labor was small, never realizing that smallness was the entire foundation of everything that came after. The world is not built in triumphs. It's built in repetitions. Tiny, anonymous repetitions. Every click of a key, every turn of a bolt, every scrub of a cloth. All of it part of the same rhythm, the quiet music of survival. The final blessing. If there's a kind of sainthood left for our species, it belongs to the workers, the living and the dead, who understood that work itself was the only prayer that mattered. They didn't build for recognition. They built because collapse was always near. They labored not for glory, but for continuation. The medievals called it duty. We call it a paycheck. But under the names, it's the same faith, a belief that what you do matters, even if no one ever says thank you. So when the lights flicker, when the world feels too heavy, remember you are not alone in your exhaustion. There have been millions like you. There will be millions more. You are part of a lineage older than history, a fellowship of tired souls who all said the same quiet vow. The vow that built the world. Because someone has to. It's the sentence that built cities. The whisper that outlived every empire. The one truth that never needed writing down because everyone already knew it. It's the breath beneath every civilization, the heartbeat that never made it into the history books. Because someone has to. It was said under breath, through gritted teeth, in prayer, in exhaustion. It was said by the tanner, by the miner, by the washerwoman and the scribe. And it's still said now. By the janitor, by the nurse, by the one who closes the office after everyone else has gone home. The words belong to no one. And that's why they've survived everyone. The shape of the world. If you could peel back the centuries, strip away the kings and wars and borders, what you'd find beneath it all is rhythm. The rhythm of hands, the rhythm of feet, the rhythm of labor. Every age has its own tempo. The clang of hammers in the Iron Age, the clatter of looms in the Renaissance, the hum of servers in ours. Different notes. Same song. A lullaby for survival, played by the unseen orchestra of the ordinary. You can hear it in every street at dawn, in every factory at night, in every tired sigh before work begins. It's not music meant to be beautiful. It's music meant to be true. The work behind the work. For every great discovery, there's an invisible mountain of maintenance. For every artist, someone stretched the canvas. For every soldier, someone forged the blade. For every sermon, someone lit the candles and swept the floor. The history books show the peaks. The workers live in the valleys, and yet, without the valleys, there are no mountains. It was true in the medieval world, and it's true now. A billion unseen gestures, hands tightening bolts, minds counting inventory, bodies repeating small motions, make the grand movements of progress possible. And still, no one writes songs about them. Maybe they never needed songs. The work was enough. The hands that never rest. Somewhere right now, someone is scrubbing a hospital floor. Someone else is welding steel high above a city. Someone is typing the last line of a report no one will read. Someone is repairing a pipe or baking bread or staying awake beside a sick loved one. They don't think of it as noble. It isn't. It's necessary. The same way it was necessary for a plague barrier to lift another body, for a candle maker to dip another wick, for a gravedigger to keep the shovel moving even when his arms ached. Necessity is not heroism. It's what comes before it. The thing that makes heroism possible. Without those who endure, no one else would have the luxury of triumph. The machinery of memory. The medievals believed that time itself was circular. That history wasn't a road, but a wheel. They weren't wrong. Everything we think of as modern is just an echo of something older. Our skyscrapers are cathedrals in glass. Our news feeds are the new confessionals. Our cities pulse like monasteries of light. We've dressed our rituals in pixels instead of prayer, but they serve the same God, the God of order against chaos. And every worker, then and now, is a monk of that order, keeping the cycle from spinning too fast, keeping it from falling apart. Maybe that's why the medieval world never truly ended. It just became invisible. The grace of the unfinished. The most beautiful thing the medievals left us was not their art or their faith, but their incompleteness. Every wall was left half built, every book half written, every life half lived, and yet the fragments endure. Maybe they knew something we don't. That perfection is death, and only unfinished things can last forever. Work that never ends cannot die. It only changes form. The gong farmer became the sewer worker. The scribe became the coder. The washerwoman became the nurse. And one day, you will become someone else too. That's how eternity hides in the ordinary. Not in temples, but in tasks. The gospel of motion. To stop working is to admit defeat. To rest too long is to invite the world to crumble. That's the truth the medievals lived by, and it's the truth we still fear. We keep moving because movement feels like meaning, and maybe it is. Each motion says, I'm still here, I still matter. The world still turns because I do. In their time, work was a hymn. In ours, it's a heartbeat. The tools change, but the rhythm remains tick, click, hum, sigh. The endless music of doing. The circle of dust. Someday, everything we've built will fall to dust. That's not prophecy. It's arithmetic. The machines will rust. The screens will go dark. The records will fade, and someone, centuries later, will find a fragment of what we left behind, a half-broken tool, a burned-out bulb, a faded file. They'll turn it in their hands and wonder what kind of people we were. And if they're kind, they'll know the answer. We were the same as them. Tired, hopeful, afraid of forgetting, trying to make something last just one day longer. And when they return to their own broken world, they'll whisper, because language may have changed, but truth never will. Because someone has to. Eternal labor. If there's one thing the medievals would recognize in us, it's not our cities or our science, it's our exhaustion. That bone, deep fatigue that lives between meaning and necessity. The ache that says, I'll rest when it's done, knowing it never will be. But in that exhaustion lies the closest thing we have to grace. Because to keep working, to keep trying, to keep holding the world up when no one's watching, that's the oldest, truest kind of love. Not romantic love, not divine love, just the quiet, stubborn love that says, I care enough to keep this from falling. And that's how the world survives. Not through greatness, but through care. Through hands that never stop moving, hearts that never stop hoping, and the whisper that has outlasted time itself. Because someone has to. That's where it begins, and that's where it always ends. Every civilization, every family, every life is balanced on that single sentence. It's the invisible pillar holding the sky. It doesn't sound grand. It doesn't echo like scripture. But it's older than prayer, older than language, older than everything we've ever called progress. Because someone has to. The moment one person says it, the world starts again. The first spark, no one remembers the first person who said it. It might have been a woman picking up a crying child. It might have been a man stacking stones to make shelter. It might have been someone striking flint in the dark. Before lords, before gods, before kingdoms, there was need, and need always demands a volunteer. Someone had to light the fire. Someone had to keep it burning. Someone had to stay awake while the others slept. That's where civilization started. Not in invention, but in endurance. The first miracle wasn't creation. It was continuation. The rhythm of the living, the world doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in circles, day into night, labor into rest, birth into death. The medievals understood that. They didn't try to conquer time. They learned to live inside it. They woke, worked, prayed, slept, over and over, until the motion itself became holy. Every hammer strike, every scrub of a floor, every slow step through the fields was a heartbeat. And when they stopped, the world stopped. The modern world hums louder, but the rhythm hasn't changed. It's just faster, more frantic, but it's the same song. The song of motion that keeps the void away. The noise is our prayer now. The inheritance of burden, we inherit many things. Names, blood, mistakes. But the most enduring inheritance is labor. You can trace it like a river from the gong farmer to the sewage worker. From the monk to the programmer. From the candle maker to the power engineer. They pass the torch, literally and metaphorically, from hand to hand, century to century. They never meet, but they keep the same faith. If I stop, everything stops. That's the human covenant. We don't need to understand the meaning of work. We just need to believe it matters. And it does. Because the moment no one believes that anymore, the lights go out. The cost of continuity. Every act of preservation carries a price. Someone pays it. Someone always does. In the medieval world, it was the workers who lived by the river. The ones who caught disease, so the nobles could drink clean water. It was the tanners, the leech collectors, the candle makers. Today, it's the miners digging lithium, the farmers working through heat waves, the cleaners breathing recycled air in glass towers. Progress never removes the cost. It just changes who pays it. And yet, they keep going, not because they love the work, but because they understand something deeper than love. something older, something the rest of us have forgotten. The world has to be maintained. It doesn't stay upright on its own. The fragile gods, in the old world, people built gods to explain the unseen forces that held everything together. Rain, harvest, fire. But the real gods were never in the heavens. They were down here, wearing rags, pushing carts, cleaning streets, grinding grain. Every religion that survived was written on their sweat. They didn't need belief. They needed bread. And by needing it, they kept the rest of humanity alive long enough to build faith on top of their exhaustion. Today we worship new gods, speed, data, convenience. But their temples still run on the same fuel human hands. Every algorithm is built on labor. Every luxury balanced on someone else's tired back. It's not injustice. It's inheritance. We were born into the hierarchy of effort. We didn't choose it. But someone has to. The architecture of oblivion walk through any old city. Every brick, every beam, every piece of glass is an artifact of endurance. But you don't think of the hands that placed them. You never do. No one does. That's the cruel poetry of work. The better you do it, the less anyone notices it was done at all. A perfectly built wall disappears. A perfectly cleaned floor is invisible. A perfectly timed machine is silent. And yet, invisibility is its own kind of immortality. The proof of their labor is the fact that you don't have to see it. You just live inside it. The beauty of the unseen we call art beautiful when it lasts. But maybe beauty isn't in what lasts. Maybe it's in what keeps going even when it won't. The washerwoman scrubbing blood from cloth. The carpenter shaping wood for a coffin. The miner chipping away at a tunnel that will collapse in a decade. They all knew it wouldn't last, but they did it anyway. There's a beauty in that kind of hopeless effort. The quiet defiance of impermanence. That's what art really is, continuation without promise. And labor is the truest art of all, the ghost in the routine. Every routine hides a ghost. Someone who did the same thing before you, someone who will do it after you. The act of repetition is resurrection. You pour water into a cup the same way someone did in the year 900. You write, you clean, you build. And somewhere, someone ancient is mirroring you in memory. We're not alone in our monotony. We're surrounded by echoes. The medievals are not gone. They live inside the rhythm of our work. When you sigh before a long day, you're breathing the same air they exhaled. When you finish a task and no one thanks you, you're joining their congregation of ghosts, millions of hands united by effort. And maybe that's the truest form of eternity. The quiet immortals, some people die once. Workers die 1,000 small deaths. Every repetition, every ignored effort, every thankless night. But they also live 1,000 small lives. Each act of endurance rebirths the world for one more day. A mother wakes early to make breakfast. Civilization continues. A janitor locks the doors. The city sleeps in safety. A stranger fixes a wire. The dark retreats. Immortality isn't a crown. It's a mop. It's a key ring. It's the will to do what must be done when no one else will. Because someone has to. And they always will. The last light someday, the last worker will lay down their tools. The last machine will stop. The last city will fall silent. But even then, in the dark, in the dust, in the quiet aftermath, someone will pick something up. A child, maybe. A remnant of something that used to matter. A candle stub. A broken screen. They'll look at it, not understanding what it was, only knowing that it once gave light. And with trembling hands, they'll try to make it glow again. And when someone asks why, They'll say the same words that carried the world through plague and war, through famine and flood, through every collapse and every rebirth, because someone has to, and the words will leave their lips like breath into cold air. Simple, unremarkable, human, and that will be the moment the world begins again. Not with thunder, not with a shout, but with a whisper. The whisper of someone deciding, once more, to push against the dark, to hold, to clean, to fix, to care, to do the smallest thing that keeps everything else from ending, because that's how it's always been. That's how it will always be. The history of the world is not the story of kings, or inventions, or revolutions. It's the story of people who said those 4 words and meant them. The birth of morning, every morning, is built on unseen labor. Before you open your eyes, someone has already made your world ready for you. The baker kneaded the dough in darkness. The cleaner unlocked the door to the train station. The farmer walked through wet fields with frozen hands. The nurse adjusted a pillow for a stranger. Each of them spoke the same vow, not to you, but to the rhythm of existence itself. Keep going. You wake into their work. You breathe their effort, and you pass it on. When you, too, rise from sleep and start the chain again. The quiet hour. There is a time before dawn when the world feels weightless. Cities are silent, machines rest, and the only sound is the hum of what's still being tended. The streetlights flicker. The air smells like metal and rain. Somewhere, a figure sweeps the pavement, a small island of motion in a sea of stillness. No one sees them. No one thanks them. But because they are there, the rest of us get to believe the world is still whole. They are the last monks of order. Their prayers are made of movement. Their rosary is repetition. And every stroke of the broom is a hymn that keeps the night from winning. The weight of continuation. We like to imagine the future as something new, something untouched, something clean. But the truth is, the future is built from leftovers, from dust, from repetition, from hands that refused to let go. Every tomorrow rests on the work of yesterday. Every clean street, every warm room, every working light is the child of someone's exhaustion. The world has never been remade, only maintained. We are not creators of eternity. We are its caretakers. And maybe that's enough. The line that never ends. There's a line that stretches across all of time. It begins in the dark, with someone lighting a fire, and runs through every age, every field, every factory, every city. That line is unbroken. It is drawn in sweat, ink, blood, and quiet. It's the line of continuity, the one thing we never lose. When a gong farmer lifted his shovel, when a glassblower exhaled molten breath, when a doctor ties a mask behind her ears, it's the same gesture, the same intention, the same defiance of oblivion. You can't see it. But if you stand still long enough, you can feel it pulling through your spine, connecting you to everything that came before. The gift of small things, the greatest kindness humanity ever created was smallness. The small gesture, the small job, the small moment. We build too much in pursuit of greatness and forget that the world runs on the ordinary. A cup filled, a table wiped, a wound dressed. That's what civilization is, the daily miracle of the miner. The medievals knew this instinctively. That's why their lives were a liturgy of maintenance. They didn't need grand stories to feel important. They only needed a task. We envy their faith. They would envy our blindness. The tenderness of the tired. There is a particular gentleness that lives only in the exhausted. A kind of soft understanding of the world's fragility. When you've scrubbed floors, when you've buried the dead, When you've fixed something that will break again tomorrow, you start to see the beauty in impermanence. You stop chasing forever. You start loving what lasts only a day. That's why the tired are often kind. They've seen too much of what vanishes. They know that care is not infinite. And that's exactly why it matters. In their quietness lies the deepest compassion. The recognition that all of this, all of us, require constant mending. The long memory of hands. Hands remember what the mind forgets. They carry the muscle memory of every age. When a craftsman turns a tool, he's echoing the gesture of someone who lived 1,000 years ago. When a cook stirs a pot, when a writer traces letters, when a mechanic tightens a screw, those are ancient motions, older than the languages we use to describe them. The body remembers survival. The hands remember creation. And through them, we remember the world. That's why labor feels familiar. It's a memory older than our names. The circle of the living and the dead do not vanish. They transform into structure. The walls that hold us were built by their persistence. The food we eat grows from the soil they tended. The light we use burns on the oil of their effort. They are gone only in the way a foundation is hidden. Without them, everything collapses. We owe them nothing, but we owe the world the same care they gave it. That's the only repayment that makes sense to keep it going, to add one more link to the chain, to make one more day possible. Because someone has to. The eternal shift someday. The sun will rise on a world that looks nothing like ours. Our buildings will be ruins. Our screens will be fossils. Our words will be dust. And yet, somewhere, someone will wake up and begin again. They will step into their own small circle of repetition without knowing that they are part of something ancient. They'll mend, clean, plant, heal, carry. They'll sigh and whisper the same tired, holy phrase that has kept the earth from going still for millennia, because someone has to. And in that whisper, the world will remember itself once more. And when they say it, when those words rise again in some far future throat, the circle will close and open and close again. That is how time truly moves. Not forward, not backward, but around. Every civilization, no matter how advanced, eventually rediscovers humility. It happens in silence. After the noise, after the collapse, after the arrogance burns out, and what remains is what always remains: a human being, standing amid ruins, holding something fragile, whispering, "I'll keep this alive a little longer." That's the first act of rebuilding, the one that no history ever records. The future is memory. We like to think the future will be strange, filled with wonders, machines, ideas beyond imagination. But the truth is, the future is just the past in better lighting. The same gestures, the same needs, the same fears. There will always be someone wiping dust from a surface. Someone repairing something they didn't break. Someone teaching a child how to survive. And someone, always someone, asking, why do we keep doing this? And the answer will always be the same. Because the world doesn't stay alive on its own. Because life itself is a conversation between the living and the dead. Because the promise of existence is maintenance. They'll call it something new. Efficiency, sustainability, automation. But it will be the same prayer, just spoken in another accent. And that's okay, because meaning doesn't live in the word. It lives in the act. The cathedral of hands, every era builds a cathedral. The medievals built theirs from stone and faith. We built ours from glass and electricity, but both were built for the same reason: to hold something sacred. Theirs held the idea of heaven. Ours holds the idea of connection. Both glow at night, both hum with devotion, and beneath both, the same kinds of people work, sweeping floors, polishing steps, tending light. They are the stewards of sanctity, whether they believe in gods or not. The cathedral has changed shape, but the worship never stopped. It simply became mechanical. Rituals of motion, prayers disguised as routine. When the janitor empties a trash bin at midnight, it is no less holy than a monk lighting a candle. Both are acts of preservation. Both are declarations that the world, for one more moment, will not decay. The sound of tomorrow, if you could listen to the future, it would sound like a hum. The steady murmur of machines, the low thrum of human breath inside them. It would sound exactly like the past. The rhythm of tools against matter, of hearts against time. The song never changed. Only the instruments did, and maybe that's the point. The universe doesn't need melody. It needs maintenance. A song without end, played by people who don't even know they're musicians. The weight of meaning. What gives life meaning? The medievals asked that question in their churches. We ask it on our screens. They searched for God. We search for purpose. And both are really the same search. A way to make sense of repetition. Because deep down, we all know existence is work, and the work never ends. We try to turn it into art, or money, or love, but underneath every motive lies the same truth. We do things because if we don't, everything falls apart. And if that sounds bleak, look again. There's beauty in that truth, because it means we matter. Every gesture, no matter how small, is a stitch in the great unraveling. And when you see it that way, every act of labor becomes an act of love. The thread that binds picture the world not as a globe, but as a vast tapestry, woven from millions of threads, each one a life, each one a day, each one a repetition. The medievals wove in wool and prayer. We weave in code and routine. But the fabric is the same. It holds because we hold it. It tears when we stop. The miracle isn't that it's perfect. The miracle is that it's still here at all. Every generation leaves its patch, stitches its time into the cloth, and then vanishes into the pattern. No one sees their work in the end, but it's there, quietly holding the rest together. And when it frays, someone new sits down, picks up the needle, and begins again. Because someone has to. The humility of light has no memory, but it still returns every morning. That's how we should live. Not with hope of reward, not with expectation of eternity, but with the simple understanding that dawn depends on motion. The medievals didn't see the sunrise as routine. They saw it as mercy, a sign that their work, their faith, had been enough to keep the darkness away. We take it for granted now. We assume the light will come. But maybe we shouldn't. Maybe the sun rises because we keep making reasons for it too. Because every act of effort is a kind of gravity, holding the world in orbit around purpose. The universe doesn't owe us meaning. We give it meaning. Every time we refuse to stop trying, the kindness of continuity, the greatest kindness we can give is continuation. To leave the world just slightly less broken than we found it. To keep something working, even when we're too tired to care. To sweep the dust, to replace the bulb, to teach someone how to do the same. That's how love survives its own death. It transforms into habit, into duty, into motion. Every parent who cooks, every worker who stays late, every friend who listens, they're all keeping the same promise. That nothing built with care will disappear quietly. The last tomorrow someday, far ahead, the last sunrise will come. The sky will glow, and the earth will hold its breath. And still, someone will wake early. Someone will stand, stretch, and begin their morning tasks, not knowing it's the final day. They'll tidy a room, or fix a broken thing, or simply watch the light fall across their hands. They'll do it not for glory, not for history, but for the same reason every worker since the beginning of time has done it, because the world feels wrong when it stops. And when the light finally fades and everything goes quiet, the last sound humanity will make won't be a scream or a prayer. It will be a sigh, soft, certain, peaceful. The sound of someone setting down their tools after a lifetime of holding everything together. And in that silence, the universe will remember the words that made it possible for anything to exist at all. Because someone has to.